Welcome to Talking Volumes, the podcast about architecture made by students, hosted by me, Euan Russell.
And me, Ruben J. Brown.
And welcome to our first series of episodes considering the built environment from lots of different perspectives.
We've just begun our first term of architecture school, so these episodes are all about confronting our own experiences of architecture and thinking about how it affects the ways in which we live.
And along the way, we'll use architecture as a lens to understand history or politics, philosophy or art, and any of the other fields it interacts with.
In this episode, I'm asking Euan about his experiences as a skateboarder and how skateboarding is central in the conflict of what it means for space to be public, who gets to use it, in what way, and under whose control.
And later on, we'll be going into Cambridge to see how this conflict plays out in the city and what's being done about it.
Stay tuned. So, Euan, it's now November. It's the first time we've recorded an episode at university, and we're both in Cambridge. We're about a 10-minute cycle from each other, if that. And yet we're still doing this online.
We're still online. It was just virtual.
Yeah, I got you in my little FaceTime window. I got our notes next to you. Spent 10 hours on Zoom yesterday in crits.
That was fun.
Doing a degree. Highly recommended at this time in the world.
I've spent 3 weeks just in my room.
Oh yeah, Euan's been in isolation for longer than he's been out. We're now 5 weeks into term and it's 60% in isolation, 40% out. And as soon as you get out of isolation, lockdown 2.0.
Last week I got my first Tuesday out of isolation since term started.
Euan's first Tuesday. Went to the pub, had a lime and soda, stayed thoroughly undrunk and pulled an all-nighter watching the election.
It was great. It's good to be out.
So with that context, this episode is slightly different to what we'd planned, but I think it's still going to be a great show, and I think we're still going to think some interesting thoughts. But yeah, let's start at the beginning. How long have you been skating for?
Yeah, that's always the question you actually get asked at a skate park if someone's sort of trying to gauge how good you are. And I've been skating since I was like 10 or 11, so it's sort of 8 years now. But I'm probably not that good, you know?
Yeah, right. But I guess at that point, you weren't exactly thinking about the kind of act of skateboarding as something relational to architecture.
Yeah, like not like I am today at all. I started skating because my brother skated, so I just always thought it was really cool. And like this summer I finished primary school, the weather was really nice and I went out in the cul-de-sac and sort of got really into it. And at first I wasn't that comfortable on the board, so I had to be comfortable in the spaces I was skating. So I spent ages learning to ride the thing on my street or journey to school, starting to do hills and go a bit faster. I actually broke my wrist pretty early on bombing a hill on my way to school because I used my hands to break my fall, which like you just shouldn't do. And I think being in a cast for the rest of that summer actually weirdly got me way more into it.
So you probably weren't thinking about it then, but the spaces you're in seem to be really having an effect on how you're skating. And like, when do you think you started to notice architecture in relation to skating?
Yeah, so Durham, where I was skating, has never really had a local skate park. So it was really out of a necessity to find places to skate that I got into sort of street skating. When I was like 13 and had a few tricks down, I could do an ollie. So basically jumping with the board up a curb. And I felt like I was able to move through space on the board more fluently and get over some of the kind of obstacles in my local environment. So a couple of my friends and I started leaving our streets and heading downhill into Durham city centre to find skate spots.
So when you start looking at your city as something that's skateable, how does that change your experience of it?
Well, those first few street sessions in Durham were some of probably the most fun we'd ever had in our city. Durham's really small, like you can walk from one end to the other in half an hour. But it wasn't until I skated it that I really felt I knew what was down every side street. My friends and I quickly developed what I later learned is called the skater's eye, which basically means there's always a part of you considering architecture in terms of how good it is for skating. So sort of in terms of your potential action upon it. It's something that like you basically can't turn off. Like you're always thinking about it.
It's like such a profound idea to me. And so in the last couple of days, like doing research for this episode, I've been out with Euan skating and like shooting some clips for him. And I've noticed it. And like when we were in Sidgwick site yesterday, part of the university, and it was kind of like nighttime and we were looking for spots and you just instantly saw like, oh, you can't skate that. Like it's got this certain texture on the ground that means you can't do it. And like you just see it immediately, but then you see that stair that we spent like half an hour doing that trick on, and like it's so immediate. It's amazing to me. And you start to engage with the city in this very different way. Like it's a very active form of vision. So the skater's eye is a way of using vision to almost predict how a space would interact with a skateboard.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're looking for stair sets to do tricks down, ledges, benches, curbs to grind on, banks on the side of buildings, like weird sculptural bits of architecture are always fun too. And I also really like those little bits of space where the ground comes up to meet the height of a curb because they can really sort of launch you. And handrails are also a big one, but I'm not quite at that level yet. And you're also focusing on things like surface textures and densities and like the shape and form of the architecture, the slope of the ground that could completely mess with your speed. These are all things you feel through the mediator of the skateboard. There's this guy, Euan, a skateboarder and professor of architecture and urban culture at the Bartlett, who puts it really nicely. He says, the skateboarder projects their body onto architecture and so reproduces it in their own terms. So you're really relating yourself and your body extended through the board to the built environment.
But like this use of space is in a real opposition to what it was designed for. And maybe these different uses of space by different people can cause conflict. You know, like when we've been out again in the last couple of days, there's something that feels innately wrong about being in a public space and using it for skateboarding. You feel looked at and you feel like you're not prescribing to like the right way of doing it. And do you experience that often?
Yeah, you get kicked out of spots all the time. Like in Durham, I feel like I kind of know where to go now and when to go there. But when I'm in another city, I might not understand what forces are controlling different areas yet. So like in Newcastle or London, it kind of feels like in some places you just get a window of about 2 minutes in each spot before you get kicked out, especially if you're being really brave with where you choose to skate. And I think that act of skateboarding in my city sort of gave me more awareness of how the city is controlled and owned, and how the idea of public space doesn't really include everyone. I started to think of Durham as sort of split up into different portions of space, all managed differently, with some allowing you to skate and others not.
That's so fascinating to me. And like in Cambridge, I think that's even more visible because of the collegiate system. So you've got like 30 colleges and then the university itself. And there was that spot we went to in like the entrance to Gorville and Keys College. And you were like, yeah, it's a cool spot, but it's such a bust. Like we'll get kicked out in 2 minutes. And a porter comes out and kicks us out immediately. It's like you just know that. It's like you've seen these spots and you're immediately seeing how you could use them to skate, but you're also seeing the power behind them and like whether they're going to allow you to or not.
Yeah, like that spot was one that I'd been walking past every day. And just every time I see it, I really want to skate it. Like it felt like kind of a brave one to go for. And we got like 2 tries and then got kicked out.
Yeah. And something else with that is that cities are constantly changing and developing, and the powers that control certain land are constantly changing hands. And of course, people are aware of how the city is changing because it changes how they experience it. But do you think the skateboarding in your city made you notice those changes more, or like in a different way?
Yeah, I think in a different way for sure. Like I really remember when they demolished the old 60s passport office in Durham, and for ages I'd thought of that building as like really ugly and imposing. But it was actually such a good skate spot. When they demolished it and built a new one across the river, that became the go-to spot for a while because of all the stairs and seating that it had. But I remember skating at the new passport office area pretty soon after it was built and looking across the river, watching the old one getting demolished. And it felt like a really big deal. And a lot of people were happy to see it go, but it was kind of a shame to lose it. Like people have been skating there since like the 80s. But at the same time, it does feel like the city keeps presenting new obstacles for you.
And when you're saying obstacles, are you talking about the features of the city's architecture? Like what sort of obstacles were you finding as a skater in Durham?
Well, in the new passport office, because lots of people had started skating it, the council spent thousands, as one like angry passerby once told me, on replacing the entire top level of all the ledges in the space with ones that had indents to stop skateboarders doing grinds on them.
That's a good little reference there. Angry passersby, reliable sources of knowledge.
Fact check.
Yeah, fact check. But so these little indents on the top that the councillors supposedly spent a lot of money installing, they're examples of skate stoppers, right?
Yeah, they're one of these subtle forms of hostile architecture that once you know what they are, you'll start seeing them everywhere. They're supposed to stop marks and scratches from skaters, but they're also designed to keep the skaters themselves away from the area as a form of social control.
It's funny how subtle they are, and they're like aimed at a very specific group of people, right? It's like a form of social control that's aimed only at skateboarders. And pre-lockdown, I was at the pub with a few people, and when we left, there was this really high-pitched noise. It was impossible to place like in 3-dimensional space. I couldn't work out where it's from. And that's like a small tiny speaker system that's broadcasting a frequency that only people below like 30 can hear, because we lose frequency as we get older. And again, that's like a really like subtle thing that you won't experience if you're not part of that group. Like you just won't notice it. And it's really dark. It's such a dark pattern of like, that is architecture, that sound, as are skate stoppers, and they don't affect anyone else. It's like very aimed at a very targeted group of people. And this noise is to stop you from loitering after the pub shuts. But I guess maybe we'll come back more to the kind of basis of that social control idea in a minute. I'm interested in what kinds of scratches and marks that skating can make that you're talking about. It's quite fascinating to me.
Yeah, you get small wheel marks on walls where people have done wall rides, and you get kind of blackened edges from people doing grinds. And this is actually like another part of the skater's eye. Not only are you looking to think about how you could skate a spot, but you're also looking to see the marks of other skaters. So when I was about 13, I went down this side street around the back of this charity shop on North Road in Durham looking for somewhere to skate. The row of buildings with the charity shop dug into a hill, so you can access the roofs from the back, where the charity shop had their donation drop-off point. And I walked into this space and felt like I'd hit the absolute jackpot, because there are all these layers and layers of wax on all the walls, which meant that generations of skaters had already used it.
It's so sick to me. I love the history of it, and like those layers of wax, as if other skaters have like painted their mark into that space over and over again. Why is that space so good for skating?
Well, a section of it was literally just a void, like a 5 meter deep portion of space that's just filled with rubbish. And the rest is this really weird multi-level area with all these small concrete walls of about 2 feet high, which separate and move between different levels, channeling rainwater for drainage. And the ground is really smooth, so it's perfect for skating. And my friends and I started spending quite a lot of time there.
It sounds like one of those weird, out of the way, like meaningless spaces. And maybe that's part of why it's so good for skating. And I'm kind of struck again when we've been having these conversations about skating in preparation for this episode about how much it reminds me of being like 12 to 14 in Brighton. And we used to go and climb on roofs of buildings and explore abandoned places and stuff like that. And there's this same strange, out of the way meaninglessness to the spaces that we'd experience when we're doing like urban exploration stuff. You experience all these details left by other people as well, just like you're saying with skateboarding. Like you'd get metal fences propped up as kind of makeshift ladders, or the boards used to cover abandoned windows would be pinned open. You could often see a spot that you might be able to get into or get on top of, like through these kind of interventions made by other people. But the great challenge in that experience was to kind of find somewhere that no one else had been before, to be the first person. And is that the same for skaters as well?
Well, I suppose it's really hard to ever assert that you are the first person to skate something unless it's just been built.
Right. Okay.
So if you've got something new built, it's so exciting because everyone's trying to sort of test the limits of the space and see what tricks they can get. And it becomes like filming is very important in that, and social media becomes quite important in that dialogue with the space. And also the fact that once something's just been built, they might not have had time to properly put skate stoppers in yet, or have proper security implemented and stuff like that. So you have this sort of window of opportunity, which is really exciting. And, you know, I'd be really excited to find a spot that I felt like no one else had found before, but at the same time, it was so exciting to know that other people had skated it. It was almost like an affirmation of the skater's eye. I was like, yes, people actually skate this.
Like back when I was doing urbex stuff, there were these forums, right? And like people would post spots they'd found on like a map on the forum, and they'd have like photos and they'd do a little blog post about it. And, you know, I used those forums to like find spots that we could go into, but also, and maybe we should do an episode about this as well, because I also like, you wanted to post on these forums too. It's like you wanted to have someone somewhere to be like, oh, I got this place. And I think there's a couple spots that I found, but I never found anything like significant. And also on these forums, there's something really interesting about how like there are all these post-2008, post-2009 like financial crash buildings. So there was this kind of like wave of abandoned buildings, right? This wave of developments that had just been abandoned that there was a lot of like activity for. And then a lot of those get demolished over time. Like in the 10 years after that, less and less of these buildings existed because they get rebuilt and redeveloped as the economy recovers. So there was like less and less stuff every year, it felt like. So finding a new spot was almost impossible, because again, it's almost the opposite way though. You're talking about like finding a new spot as like a new building, and I'm kind of finding a new spot as something that is newly abandoned.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I find how you talk about the kind of forum really interesting, because when I first started skating in Durham, when I first started looking for street spots, I searched online like skate spots, Durham, Northeast.
Yeah.
And there was this big guide online called the Nowhere Guide. And it's from like, you know, early 2000s. And I went on there and it was like posts from sort of 2001 to 2003 kind of time. And it was people saying like, oh yeah, there's this spot, and some of the spots I recognized and they're still there, and others are totally gone. And I found out like there used to be a skate shop in Durham.
Oh wow.
So it's not this feeling that things are always getting better. Like there was in the past, it might have been more of a sort of common thing in the area. Like sometimes I look back and remember old bits of architecture that are no longer there that would have been so fun to skate, or that maybe now I'd be more able to skate. But looking on that guide was so amazing because I just thought, what are these spaces now? And it's like such a window to like the past.
I'd be fascinated by seeing where skate parks first become part of playground architecture. Like, where is the first point where we start? You know, if you're building a play park in a new development, you kind of pair that with a skate park, as often happens. And like, I think when we look back at a lot of skate parks as kind of new labor, early 2000s era, I think, you know, you've identified those kind of parks to me. And I think you talk about the idea of the skate park as removing skateboarders from the actual city and removing them from architecture and giving them their own defined space. So I guess like appropriation is really powerful, what you're talking about. And like with this charity shop, this spot in Durham, that using it for the purpose that it wasn't intended for is really radical.
I just wanted like this really interesting thing that I never knew about skate parks. There were so many more skate parks in the 70s and early 80s than there are now.
Wow.
Around like Ian Borden wrote about this and I didn't know about it before, but there were so many skate parks built in the 70s and 80s because people thought it was like a real opportunity to make loads of money.
Right.
But then there were all these issues with insurance and people suing each other.
Yeah.
So many of them were demolished. And that's when street skating really became a thing. So there was a huge boom in skateboarding back then and it lost so much popularity afterwards.
And would parks be built like by private developers?
Yeah.
So would you pay for access?
Yeah, you might pay for access when you go in. There might be a little shop there or something.
And then you'd break your leg and they'd have to file a massive insurance claim and it would be right. So then the public office kind of took on that burden, right? Like most outdoor skate parks, at least now, are run by local councils.
Yeah.
So they've kind of taken on that burden because it's easier for them to get both planning permission and insurance, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's such an kind of economically controlled thing.
So like street skating is kind of inherently anti-capitalistic.
Yeah.
Rad.
I was amazed when I was at Edinburgh Book Festival and Ian Borden was like, oh yeah, there was a huge boom back then. And then basically when all the skate parks started going down and like, it was just street, it was like became so much more underground again. Like skateboarding was really getting quite commercialized. I'd say in the 70s. And
also because it was commercialized acceptable, right?
Yeah.
Like socially, it wasn't scary. Socially, it was accepted. Yeah.
Yeah. It was sort of going in the direction that maybe snowboarding ended up going in.
Yeah,
that became a lot more sort of commercialized and accepted,
definitely.
But it never did.
Yeah, like big sponsorships and stuff in snowboarding are a massive deal.
And I mean,
in a way that skate has it.
Yeah, it has it.
I don't think like the big piles of money that are being thrown around to go let Travis Rice do a big like Red Bull helicopter tour of the Rockies in Canada is, you know, like that's not happening in skateboarding, I don't think. That sort of level of Red Bull money. Yeah,
so I suppose skateboarders aren't operating in that economic system very often. So there is quite a lot of hostility directed towards them. And you see similarities to other groups that aren't functioning within that productive system. If we go back to the kind of charity shop spot, there were loads of other people appropriating that space. Like when I used to skate there, quite a lot of homeless people lived there and would use some of the furniture the charity shop left out to make it more comfortable. But the police shut that down really quickly. And later there were all these hostile design measures added, like gates blocking off sheltered parts of it to make sure they didn't come back. And I mean, the experience of being homeless is completely different to the experience of skateboarding, obviously. Yeah. But you get these intersections where a hostile design measure to stop a homeless person sleeping on a bench is also really good at stopping someone from using it for skateboarding. Yeah.
Yeah. Because both are shunned from the edges of society. They're not accepted. It's like you're not using the space how it's meant to be used. And like none of these interventions really fix the problem or really like solve the root issues. You're just moving it somewhere else. And like, I wonder like if in this shop, when all of these design measures are implemented against the people who are kind of living on the roof there, if you're facing the same kind of hostility as a skateboarder, like is it, you know, is that there's an intersection, but like obviously there's going to be a difference in how you're experiencing that.
Yeah, it was much more unclear for us, actually. Like sometimes we'd get fully kicked out by the shop owners. Sometimes we might get told to come back after closing time. Sometimes no one would have an issue with you skating there. And once my friends actually got the police called on them. So it was so unclear who really had control over the space, and it's almost became like no one's responsibility. When you have this ambiguity of control and also this kind of ambiguity of form, like you don't really know what things are for and there's not much meaning in the actual form, you get what Ian Borden calls zero-degree architecture, using a term from the French sociologist Henri Lefebvre.
So it sounds like a lot of spaces you skate in are this forgotten sort of zero-degree architecture. I didn't know this term before, by the way, and it's really, really great. And there's just so much of this that reminds me again of my urban exploration stuff. The experience in the spaces you're describing feels so familiar to me. And it seems that these zero-degree spaces aren't adding any meaning to the city, but do provide meaning for skateboarders. And maybe allowing skating in these zero-degree spaces could be a really positive act that cities should welcome. But I imagine that really isn't the case.
Yeah, sadly, it just generally isn't. A lot of the time, you get kicked out of this kind of land because it's privately owned, but the identity of the owners or what they're actually using the land for is totally unclear to us. Some of my friends and I built this DIY skate park on a triangle of disused land one summer. We made this smooth transition from floor to wall called a wall ride out of concrete and some other skate features. And we were doing some more work on it next summer until a padlock was put on the gates and the trees surrounding the spot were cut down and spread out over all the stuff we'd built. So it just went back to being disused land.
That's so heartbreaking to me. There's just so much good that could be done with space like that. And it feels like the perfectly worst option was taken. It's like, how, I don't understand how, like, it's just the exact worst thing. You've excluded people from using it and killed loads of trees to do so. I mean, there's clearly demand in Durham for a skate park, and the city clearly doesn't want skaters on the street. So why not allow this random bit of disused land to be built into a park? I guess, like, are there any other interesting zero-degree spaces that you've skated or kind of manipulated before?
Yeah, well, when I first started skating street in Durham again, I rode in this space around the back of the post office, and it had this raised ledge next to the building so that vans could drop off the bags of post easily. And it was like the perfect height for me to skate at the time. And because it was a back street and you had all these different businesses backing onto it, stuff would always get left there. So once someone left a massive fridge on its side right next to the ledge, so everyone was just skating that for a couple of days.
It's so good.
It was such a big deal.
Yeah. Like this big event. There's a fridge. I'm thinking about like the land artists of the 60s and 70s in response to that. Like Walter Di Maria, and he wrote about his art as a way of making non-meaningful spaces meaningful with really simple physical interventions. And it sounds like skating does this same thing, but with an action. The action of skating can make a non-meaningful space into something really affecting and important. And I'm also fascinated by the idea of the temperamentality to it. This fridge that just appears one day and everyone skates this random new intervention in the space until it disappears again, just like that. It makes all the minor changes to a city really like meaningful and impactful. But skating doesn't exclusively happen in these forgotten spaces. It takes place within the life of the city too, right? So it feels like you're just pushed to the edges a lot of the time, whether you want that or not.
Yeah, exactly. I think street skating is actually at its best when it's part of the everyday life of the city and not tucked away in quiet corners. A lot of skateboarders, myself included, kind of think of specifically designed skate parks as being designed to exclude them from the city. And very often you'll be told by some police or a security guard, like, oh, there's a skate park just, bus journey away. It's like, yeah, but I'm here, not there, I don't want to skate there.
And I'm not technically doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
Just because I'm holding a skateboard, like it doesn't actually mean that I'm not allowed to be here.
And what you miss out on when you take the bus out to some skate park is this huge part of the creativity of skateboarding, which is in reappropriating architecture that's designed for a certain use. You're sort of critiquing the elements of control and categorization present in the design of cities. You're seeing the city in a different, subversive way. Ian Borden, to bring him up again, draws upon the sociologist Thomas Hendricks, describing these kinds of activities of play as laboratories of the possible, sidestepping into another reality where things are dismantled and built anew.
That's such a exciting and playful way of thinking about architecture. Laboratories of the possible. And skating seems to sit somewhere in the middle ground between play, sport, and art. Like we were walking through Cambridge the other night around by St. John's, and we saw people skating in that tunnel. And then we went back there like a couple of days after, and that spot's like right in the center of town near the river. And I think something else that you might miss out on by taking the bus out to that skate park is that there's all of these social interactions that happen there. So this is like this weird tunnel that links the street to a multi-story car park, and along the way there's like an entrance to this art school. And when we're skating that spot, there's all these, because of the way that you're using and moving through the space, there's all of these social interactions that happen that are really interesting and like really actually within the life of the city, as you say. And in general, predominantly, everyone's really cool with what you're doing or doesn't really mind. Like, people are kind of interesting. There's something exciting. You're doing this laboratory of the possible with the city. You're playing with it.
Yeah, there's this real sort of sense of festival around skateboarding generally, and it's quite nice to kind of talk to people about it or be joking on with people walking past and stuff like that.
Yeah, people stop and watch and kind of, I think sometimes people are interested in knowing that what's going on is like all right. And there's also this level of curiosity of like wanting to see what's happening and like someone, or just watching someone trying to get a trick for like 30 minutes on this one spot again and again. And you miss that if you're not interacting with non-skaters. I guess like it's really interesting to hear skateboarding discussed in such an academic context. And I think when things get a lot of academic writing behind them, there's more impetus to take them seriously and kind of actually consider them as like real parts of philosophy. And I guess is there much more intellectual writing and thought on skateboarding?
Yeah, I'd say it's absolutely an expanding field. Ian Borden's probably the person I've read the most. Like, his book, Skateboarding in the City, came out recently, and it's quite a big deal. As well as talking about how skateboarding creates a unique engagement with the city, it gives this super complete history of the practice of skateboarding.
Yeah, he was featured in a Vox video a couple months back. And for me as a non-skater, the condensed history of that was like really, really cool to see. And the development of the sport was so fast, and the ideas behind it really like radical as well.
Yeah, totally. I'd also recommend Ocean Howell, who's a former pro skater and writes a lot about it in relation to city planning. And Becky Beale does a lot of research into the political dynamics of skateboarding, and it interacts with gender studies a lot too. So there's so much you could read if you had the time, basically.
That's like really exciting, and I'd be interested in reading Becky Beale and the kind of gender studies aspect of that. I'm quite interested by the demographics of it, and maybe we'll come back to that a bit more later. Again, I'm thinking about all these parallels with urban exploration, and I wonder if there's like a deeper philosophical basis for some of this new thinking.
Yeah, I think with regard to architecture and the built environment and space, one of the key thinkers Ian Borden and others draw from is Henri Lefebvre.
Your fave man. Your absolutely
fave man. I just have to bring that guy up. But yeah, he is kind of a legend, and it's amazing how relevant his thinking is to how skateboarders interact with and interpret space.
So my understanding of Lefebvre is that he was a French Marxist philosopher and sociologist born in 1901. So how does his thinking come in here?
Well, he never actually really wrote directly about skateboarding. Like, don't even know if he was that aware of it. But
didn't even know it was a thing.
But one of the most important things he writes about in his 1974 book, The Production of Space, is how capitalism has become spatialized. All over the world, we can see that what we think of as public spaces are becoming increasingly privatized and categorized for economic purposes. And what this means is that so many of our new developments are designed as spaces for spending money, and thus exclude certain kinds of users. The city, public and private, isn't really open to everyone.
Right. And when you're skateboarding, you're using a space without spending money, so you have no value to the people who own the land. So skateboarding in a city designed for commerce and enjoying a space without spending money feels like this dramatically radical anti-capitalistic act.
Yeah, as I said earlier, skateboarding thrives in the heart of the city's everyday life in its supposedly shared use spaces. But really, it's these environments that can be the most controlled, in which skateboarding and other undesirable activities are prevented the most.
Yeah, we refer to them as shared use spaces, but not shared with everyone. For public spaces to be truly public, they need to welcome all kinds of uses, and not just the ones that involve spending money. But you mentioned the word undesirable here, and as the non-skate from this conversation, I do feel the need to voice the perspective of those who might describe skateboarding as an undesirable activity, whether that's like well-founded or not. Particularly with how the presence of skaters might actually exclude certain other people from a space in itself. So like maybe wheelchair users or sighting or hearing impaired people wouldn't feel as comfortable or safe in an environment with heavy skate traffic. Or maybe by using the heart of the city for skating, you inhibit pedestrian traffic. And lots of people find the sound of skating to be really unpleasant. I kind of feel that possibly for skaters to be facilitated, others may feel excluded.
Yeah, the social issues and questions posed by skateboarding are really challenging. But I think these challenges can actually be used to benefit communities if architects and city planners choose to design in that way. And we're seeing so many more examples across the world of skateboarding being built into the design of public spaces in ways which allow fun, joy, and leisure for everyone, without feeling like you have to act in a certain way to be allowed in a space. Since I've been skating in Cambridge, I've become aware of a collective that are trying to do this kind of thing here. Cam Skate is a group of young skaters who are lobbying the council and running community-led actions to better integrate skateboarding into the city of Cambridge in a way that benefits everyone.
Their ideas about how to use and design space are really, really creative, and I think we're both super excited to learn more from them. So we've reached out to all of their members, Matt, for an interview.
Matt's not an architect at all.
I moved to New York when I was 11. So me growing up skating, I had like everything on my doorstep, which I had an indoor skate park just down the road. So when the winter months came, I would just, go there for the whole of the winter, and it was like a brand new complex.
He grew up skating in New York, by all means a skate city. But from our interview, we got the sense that he really believes that incorporating good skate design into public spaces can benefit everyone.
Matt was in Barcelona when we called, considered by many to be Europe's skate mecca. And we began our conversation by talking about how skateboarding is considered in Cambridge and how the local council responds to it.
They've put more effort into creating spaces that are anti-skate than creating spaces that are for skateboarding. I think Cambridge is a very traditional town where, you're rowing or you're playing cricket, rugby, or, those types of sports. I feel like they see skateboarding as like the Antichrist. I mean, some people are extremely fascinated by it. Like, oh, how'd you do that? Like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I want to start doing that. And then you have like the older generations like, oh, that's too much noise. You can't be doing that here. You're going to hit someone. So it's two different, ends of the spectrum kind of thing. More so you get people that are really hyped on it. And I get hyped when I see people are hyped on what I'm actually doing, and you could have a great conversation with it. There's so many kids skating in Cambridge right now, like so many. And
it's amazing.
It's really surprising to both of us. There's so many people out. Yeah.
When I came down, I thought it would be sort of similar. I'm from Durham. And I thought it would be similar. Like if you're skating in Durham, you're probably one of the only people in the city skating at that point. But everywhere I look, there's skateboarders, and Jesus Green is just packed, and it's so exciting, actually.
Oh yeah, it's amazing, and it's heartbreaking to watch because you've got so many kids in Cambridge like trying to skate, and they're all crammed into this little skate park. And it's just, the council should be stepping up and be like, this is really a big thing. Like, we should really be taking care of these kids and giving them a bigger space. Because I've always been petitioning of trying to extend that space. But what happens is there's houses across the field. Basically, they have their own committee, and they're very against the skate park because they say it brings in, antisocial behavior. But really, it's quite the opposite. I was trying to petition to get lights there, and they said that they wouldn't want lights there because it would create more of an antisocial atmosphere. So it's a bit of a weird one.
That sounds a bit counterintuitive.
It makes everything safer for everyone, surely.
But even though you have lights on the path, but you can't put lights on the skate park. But at the end of the day, I feel like they're looking at it as if it might devaluate their property price if they put lights there. This is the funny thing. At Jesus Green Skate Park, I don't know if you've noticed that the sides of the grass, they kind of mound into the skate park, that they run into the side. So basically, the people on that committee, they wanted the skate park to be very disguised so people couldn't see it. So that's the reason why they banked up all the grass on the side of the skate park. So it was like kind of disguised in a way. They really don't want that skate park being there. That's the sad thing.
There's other thing about Jesus Green that was so weird to me when I first went, when we got here, that was like, you talk about the perfect skate city is where you don't have to get off your board. Mm-hmm. To skate at Jesus Green, you have to get off your board.
Yeah.
It's not connected. You have to go through the grass.
And you always have to wipe your shoes when you get to the park.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in the winter time. Like, I put plastic bags on my shoes to walk across the grass, and then you got to bang your shoe out. It's just like so annoying.
Yeah. And like, if they don't want, antisocial behavior happening there, then I just feel like having a skate park that's so disconnected from the life of the actual park isn't the way to do that, because you miss out on that whole thing of different people using the space.
I mean, first thing first, I don't think people or developers or councils should do this. Basically, build skate parks that are tucked away in corners, because that is gonna, it's like you're creating like this antisocial like territory for these kids, because they're out of the way from the public. They can go there, they can get up to trouble. But if you create skate parks close to public activity, let's say like where some shops are or where some houses are, or like in the limelight, so kids could, like, if they're walking to school, they could see the skate park instead of like having to, you know, clunk across a field to get to the skate park, you know? That's what should be happening more often, instead of making these skate parks tucked away in corners.
And it only exacerbates the feeling that skateboarding is like an anarchistic thing.
Definitely.
Right? It only makes that worse. If you've got the skate park integrated into the city, you know, like outside MACBA in Barcelona, an art gallery, the community polices itself, right?
Yeah.
Everyone looks after each other and everyone is looking out for each other. Like there's kind of public oversight on all sides, and everyone in the city has a stake in that park, like running well. And anyone can use that space as well. It's not like segregated as this is just a skate space.
100%. Yeah.
In line with these ideas, Camskate have quite a detailed proposal for what they describe as a skate plaza in the centre of Cambridge. But before we asked Matt about it, Euan and I wanted to visit the skate park that it would replace, Donkey Common.
There's not enough space at all. Like, you have no space to move around, and that's like one of the kind of joys of skateboarding, and it's like pinned on all sides by grass.
So you don't have any flexibility to be creative with it because you're really limited by the features themselves and nothing else, right?
Yeah, there's no space to roll on or roll off properly.
And it's not like there isn't space in the lot. The park itself only takes up like a quarter of the land area available to it.
Yeah.
The rest of it's just covered by grass.
Exactly, that no one's really using.
No.
Yeah. When it comes to the features, it's just sort of like one ramp leads directly into another.
So it's really linear.
Yeah, really linear. There's like one backwards and forwards route basically.
And then you've got two rails.
Yeah, there's a lot of tricks you could do, but it's going to be in a certain order and in a certain way as well. It's just you don't have that sense that you could flow around the space.
Right.
It's sort of like you go one way across and then you go back, and there's nowhere to sit either. Like it's right. I mean, it's right next to like the pool, and it just seems like a kind of extension of that sort of idea. It's like you come here to just skate.
Right. It's not like a social third place. It's just like
a training ground.
Right, I get you.
Not a very good one.
Not a very good one though. Yeah.
And the surfaces,
they look like plywood.
Yeah, it's like,
or like MDF.
Laminated plywood.
Yeah.
And it's like, when in the streets would you ever be skating on laminated plywood?
Right.
It's not realistic.
Yeah.
And just the sounds as you go onto the ramps, quite disconcerting.
Could we get some recording of that?
Especially when it's so slippery, you know?
I don't trust it. Like,
I really don't trust it.
I'm kind of scared when you're doing that.
Same. I suppose one of the key issues is that no non-skater would walk through the space.
Yeah.
I think in the past that was viewed as like, that's a good thing because this is for skateboarding and it's dangerous if other people are walking through the space. And that is true, but you can still get a certain amount of kind of integration and shared use even in that context.
Yeah.
And this kind of fails to do that really.
I don't see how this would be a good space for a beginner in any way. You know, we're standing 2 meters above the ground right now on a ramp.
Yeah.
Or you want like a gradation of difficulty, right?
Yeah. And there's no space to be a beginner here. Like, you don't have the room and runoff and space in between ramps and stuff. It's all very closely packed together.
Yeah. And also like a kind of social level, there's a community aspect to that as well, is that when you provide space for all kind of levels of difficulty, it's like it becomes a lot less intimidating to come here, and you get like a community of people who are helping each other to learn and kind of hyping each other up. And again, it's like there is enough space here. That's the thing. It feels quite like kind of actively limited or like just not ambitious enough.
So there are all these issues with this space. Camskate's proposal to address them is what they call a skate plaza. This would involve repaving the area and planting more trees, then constructing a small number of simple, low-cost skatable items, while leaving most of the space free and encouraging local skaters to construct their own DIY skate features. They say this would be a trial of a more city-integrated and community-led way of developing skatable places, and they reference existing projects such as the Bear Pit in Bristol and Born Skate Plaza in Barcelona. The Bear Pit in particular was a project that used skateboarding as a way to make a part of the city considered dangerous, more populated, and safer to navigate for all users.
Oh, yes. So basically, I mean, that skate park is atrocious. I don't know who built it, who designed it.
Painful trying to ride there.
Everything you wouldn't want at a skate park is there. It's a terrible space. But my idea was to create that space into like a space like Makba.
Okay, so Makba is a great example of how skateboarding can be integrated into the life of the city really well. It's a granite plaza outside the Barcelona Museum of Contemporary Art, where skateboarding's not only allowed but actually encouraged, alongside all other kinds of public use. Skateboarding, usually seen as more real and gritty, can interact with art, while art can engage with skateboarding. The space promotes a conversation between these two worlds and the people that engage with them, making both more accessible for the other.
The average person was walking by, they would look at it and be like, whoa, that's a really cool plaza. You know what I mean? Like, just like take into consideration like the architecture behind it.
That's really interesting about the plaza idea is that it allows space that isn't for skating as well, or space that could be for skating or could just be for sitting on.
Definitely.
Like, it's really non-prescriptive. And when you don't prescribe like a certain activity to be done on a feature, then it makes it much more accessible for someone who's just learning to skate. Like, there's nothing you have to do on this thing. Like, when you've got like the quarter pipe at Donkey Common right now, for me at least, someone who doesn't skate, there's no way that I'm going to hit that.
Yeah.
So the plaza just feels so much more inclusive of like everyone, and also just like even non-skaters can sit there if their friends are skating. Like, again, you can just go and have your coffee in there and watch people skate, turn it into something of the life of the city.
Yeah, just like what they do at Makba. You know, like there's people that who are there who don't skate, but they enjoy watching the skating, and then you've got people who do skate and they're skating, and everyone just like comes together, which is sick. And Cambridge doesn't have that, and we need more spaces like that. That's why
I think Donkey Common sort of, it's right opposite that kind of pool leisure centre, and it treats the skate park almost as a place for doing a sport. It's almost like you could list all the tricks combinations you could do there, and what you're proposing sounds like something much more sort of free.
It feels like architecture rather than a tennis court, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because at the end of the day, I want something that will fit into the city, that will blend in. It won't be like an eyesore in that sense, because I know that's something the Cambridge County Council will want. You know, I feel like a plaza would be like the perfect solution for that. And
like, it's such a win-win, the plaza, because you're giving so much of a better space to skateboarders, but then you're also improving that space massively for everyone else.
Basically, I mean, you're providing, that space with a new life to it. Because right now it doesn't serve any purpose. Like, you get some little kids that go there and sit underneath the ramps and, smoke cigarettes. And it's just, come on, like, we need to transform this place into something everyone will be happy with, basically.
In an attempt to find spaces for skating during the winter, CamSkate submitted a Freedom of Information request to Cambridge Council, discovering that on only 4 days in the last 2 years did Grafton East Car Park have fewer than 60 spaces available at any time. CamSkate raised that indoor car parks already feature lights, are protected from the rain, have plenty of space and smooth concrete, and are covered but still outdoors, which they note is safer during the pandemic. They say that coronavirus and the general decline of in-person shopping makes repurposing these areas an effective use of existing resources.
Yeah, that was an idea that James came up with. It's a really good idea, because not many people park in the top area of Grafton. At the end of the day, we don't have in Cambridge a place to skate that's undercover and is weatherproof. Out of the year, we only have 4 months to actually properly get a skate in and know that the weather's going to be all right. And then the rest of the months are just completely crap. In the past, we've tried to go to underground car parks and we'll always get kicked out. I mean, the idea behind the Grafton car park would be just a place that kids can go when it's crap outside, basically. I mean, James was trying to talk to the council to get some ramps put underneath there, just like some portable ones that we can move about and have a place for the kids to skate.
I think it's so creative. Like you've done freedom of information requests to find out like how many cars are actually parked in this car park. And there's the stat about like only 4 days in the last year has it exceeded 80% capacity or whatever. I think you're expressing the idea of how possible it is. And it's really optimistic, basically, which is really exciting.
And what's mad is that the council would probably think that empty space in the car park is a bad thing because people aren't going shopping. But what you're showing with this proposal is that this space can be used for something more meaningful and more valuable to the community without the need to spend money. If a space like that was created in Durham when I was younger, I would have been like completely overwhelmed.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, 100%. Same. If I was a kid, I would flock there,
Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
really, really appreciate your time. It's been great.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Guys.
See ya.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Nice to meet you.
So Euan, over the last month, we've had our conversation about skating. We've had our interview with Matt from Camp Skate, and we've been out a lot in Cambridge skating together. What we've learned is that skateboarding is considered an outsider activity and is actively pushed towards the edges. And there is a sense that the council and some residents' associations would like to pretend that it didn't exist. Matt said that Cambridge County Council put more effort into creating spaces that were anti-skate than into creating spaces that accommodated skateboarding.
What's also been increasingly clear is that successful spaces for skating must also be successful public spaces full stop. They need to accommodate all potential users and not be separated from the everyday life of the city.
When we think of and design skate spaces as spaces only for skaters, detached from the rest of the city, we design predominantly for the adolescent man, because that is who most skateboarders are. But when we design skate spaces as elements of public place, we are forced to design for the diversity of all potential users, and no longer exclude non-skaters and non-skating demographics from the sense of community, festival, and anti-capitalistic public place which skating can create.
And this doesn't mean giving over all skate spaces to the use of non-skaters. It just means thinking about how they relate to non-skaters in a different way. When the non-skater feels less excluded from skate spaces, they may be more likely to begin skating. And over time, this may change the demographic issue of male adolescents predominating in skateboarding and its culture. And skateboarding pressure groups need to have these intersectional ideas at the heart of their proposals. Otherwise, they'll fail to truly benefit the public sphere in which they operate. And to be accepted and to enter public space, skate culture as a whole needs to be actively more inclusive.
When we design skate spaces like that, it can benefit everyone. We gain public space that can be used for many different purposes. And the benefits of skateboarding, the sense of festival, playfulness, and community can be shared among everyone who passes through the space, and not just skateboarders.
But more than making skate spaces into public spaces, we need to be making public places. Making places adds another dimension to the arrangement of a space. A place is created by the relationships and connections that happen within it. A place has a unique cultural value and identity. Today, our public spaces are inherently capitalized. In most towns and cities, what we think of as public spaces are spaces which require us to spend money. Think high streets and shopping centres. These spaces are often indistinct from each other, hosting the same brands in the same types of space. A shopping centre is an air-conditioned money-spending island within the city, and Jesus Green Skate Park is a concrete island in an empty field of grass. It may be fun as a space for skaters, but it's unrelated to the wider context of the people and place of Cambridge. What we need to be doing is making places from the outset, not trying to insert the idea of place into capitalistic space. The high street and the shopping centre are becoming increasingly irrelevant as expressions of public space. As the exchange of money moves increasingly online, the economic model of physical retail is no longer sustainable. However, what we see in lots of national discourse around public space is the attempt to revive the dying high street, regardless of its unsustainable economic model, by inserting insincere, superficial expressions of community or identity into international brand name shops. For example, things like "Welcome to your Covent Garden Apple Store." However, the mission to create public places is an important one. As retail moves online, so do the public spaces in which we share ideas and have connections with people. But our social media are even more capitalized than the high streets that preceded them, but in a more obscure, less obvious way. For every moment that you spend on Instagram, Facebook earns money from your attention. And Facebook earns more money the more outraged you are. The economic model feeds off our fear and outrage. This creates the need for meaningful public places that don't rely on the exchange of money in order to be enjoyed. David Harvey, economic geographer, describes this with the Marxist term as use value, not exchange value, meaning our public places must be valued for how they're used, not for how much money is exchanged in using them. We should not define the success of public spaces in economic terms. Our public places must be defined by the connections and relationships that happen within them. I believe that skateboarding can be a vehicle to this version of public space. Skateboarders extract use value from the forms of capitalist spaces without engaging in the exchange of money. With this in mind, if we transformed the failing spaces of our high streets or our vacant shopping centres and their associated car parks into places of motion with the vehicle of the skateboard, we may step towards the notion of truly public place, shared by more than just skateboarders.
It's a convincing argument, and I believe in it. I believe in the demands of this moment for truly public places. And I believe that skateboarding may be a vehicle towards that, as well as public gardens or allotments, art spaces, within the idea of a uniquely characterized circular economy. But how do we get there? A collective like Camskate is an important thing, and collective pressure and collective action is really necessary. But to reach the goal of public places incorporating skateboarding, the challenge is to convince the power, the city council, the residents association, that these places will serve and benefit everyone and not just skateboarders. To do this, and this is the challenge of lots of architecture, you have to engage with and balance the views of many, many different people. Skaters and non-skaters, the young and the old. In this process of public engagement around public space, the different parties will have to be forced to understand each other's opinions. The skateboarders will have to compromise on how much space is exclusively for the act of skateboarding, and the non-skaters will have to be convinced that allowing skating in a public place is beneficial. The challenge may well be for the skateboarders and the groups like Camskate to reach out and engage with and listen to the people who most directly oppose them.
This active engagement in itself, the process by which places can be made, is never ending. Even at the point of a design being built, the continued engagement, listening, and understanding of one another's perspective is integral to the long-term success of the idea of the public place.
But where does that engagement happen? Well, in the very public place that so much community thought and care has gone into producing.
But there's one final thought. Skateboarding has such a strong cultural identity formed around the very idea of being in and appropriating spaces it's not quite supposed to be in, of a radical use of architecture. By engaging and compromising with the people in power to try and insert skateboarding into the local culture of a place, does skateboarding itself lose some of its own defining culture? This episode of Talking Volumes was produced in Cambridge by me, Euan Russell.
And me, Ruben J. Brown. We'd like to really thank Camskate for their time in our interview, and we really recommend that you check them out and support them on Instagram at Cambridge_skate and their website cam-skate.co.uk. In researching this episode, we've also been out together a lot, filming clips of Euan skating in places from all over Cambridge and London as well. It should be up on our Instagram and YouTube right now. We really think you should check that out.
And you can find photographs and a summary of this episode on our website, talkingvolumes.co.uk.
And follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Talking Volumes to stay tuned for new episodes.
If you have an idea for an episode that you think would fit with Talking Volumes or want to share your thoughts, we'd love to hear from you by direct message or email at talkingvolumespod@gmail.com.
Our next episode asks the question of whether a building advertised for the upper middle classes can really be considered brutal.
You'll hear from us soon.